The Passport of Mallam Ilia by Cyprian Quincy, Chapter 2, Part 1. Usuman is at large, the Indian woman. For several years after the Kano rising, Usuman was at large. He and his gang continued plundering and looting until the very name Usuman came to mean terror, a name that was mentioned only in whispers by men while mothers saved their crying children a tear or two by calling Usuman, "Here he comes." The British still wanted him for the murder of the English captain whom they had sent to interview the emir of Kefi, and I wanted him for willfully causing the death of my Zara. It was an Hausa soldier who first saw him in hiding. Mallam Usuman had camped for the night at the foot of a hill. In the evening, he was sitting beside his tent, saying his prayers, when suddenly a sharp prod in the middle of his back caused him to turn around. A man with a rifle stood over him. "Usuman, you are my prisoner." If Usuman was afraid, he did not show it. He was alone in the camp. His partners had gone out on a raid and would not be back till midnight. Usuman knew this. He also knew how helpless he was with his rifle inside the tent, so he decided to play for time. Seeing that his captor was a fellow tribesman, he spoke to him familiarly. "Mallam, I am indeed your prisoner. But why? You are a true Muslim. Why must you betray your brother to unbelievers?" The soldier frowned. "I am a soldier," he said, "and my duty comes first." "Truly, your duty comes first. But how would you like to join forces with Usuman, the terror of the north, and make money in plenty and live in luxury? People in my army do not eat dry black bread." "They warned me about this," the soldier said. "They told me you would want to buy me." Usuman's tone became suddenly confidential. "Listen, my friend, if you really want prisoners, I will tell you something. The others will soon be back, and then you can take the whole lot of us. I am getting tired of this life. My time is short," said the soldier. As he spoke, several men appeared. Usuman gasped with surprise when he realized that they were not his men. The new arrivals carried rifles and heavy sacks and were clearly members of the British Army. They took Usuman away from the camp and struck out for Kano, moving as fast as they could. They did not get far. About a mile or two from the camp, they fell into an ambush. From both sides of the road came a wild howl, then a sudden rush like an overwhelming gale, and before they realized what the position was, the soldiers were down on their faces, senseless. That great rogue quietly removed their ammunition and their rifles, remarking before he left the scene, "You didn't want to join me, now you have got your reward." But the incident had taught him a lesson, and henceforth Usuman went about with 3 of his best men, and all were heavily armed. It was still in the early 1900s, and the popular means of transporting loads in the north was by head. White men moved about in hammocks, winding their way through the bush and cursing the mosquitoes. Usuman knew this well, and soon after his encounter with the soldiers, he had somehow gleaned the information that an important British official was on his way to Kano, carrying money and food for the white men. Usuman consulted with his men. "We are in great need of money," he told them, as they sat beneath the trees, their eyes peering out across the open country. "But we are badly armed. Apart from the 4 rifles, our knives and fists, we have nothing. And they will be protected by a large number of machine guns, rifles, bayonets, and those little things that burst and blow up rocks." They decided that surprise was their chief weapon, and placing a scout on top of a tree, they made ready. About half an hour later, the scout shouted down, "Usuman, I see a cloud of dust." Usuman sprang to his feet and asked, "Are there many people?" "Hundreds." "What shall we do?" asked the others. "Do?" said Usuman scornfully. He who is afraid may leave now before it is too late. Those three men had too often seen what happened to others who obeyed this invitation to be tempted to throw away their lives so easily. For it went without saying that if any one of them had dared to leave, Usuman would have shot him in the back. "Make for the money boxes," Usuman resumed when the silence remained unbroken. They climbed into the trees and waited. Usuman could now see the long column winding its way across the tree-dotted stretch before them. He cocked his rifle and held it at the ready. As they came nearer, he could make out that, contrary to what he expected, they were three white men, and well protected they were by a ring of soldiers armed to the teeth. A few yards from the tree, the procession stopped, and for one tense moment, even the dauntless Usuman gaped with fear as he thought they had seen him. But the white men were merely stretching their legs and admiring the scenery. "Listen," whispered Usuman. "I think the money is in those black boxes. Go for them at once. We'll be behind the rocks." Usuman winked at the men, and together they got down and raced for the carriers bearing the strong boxes. A short and swift engagement followed. No shots were fired. The raiders were in the midst of the team one moment, and the next moment they had knocked down the strong box. Usuman had dismounted a man and got into the saddle himself. And as he read the horse around, the money was handed to him, and he rode away amidst a cloud of dust. It was a dodge they had rehearsed many times before, and Usuman rode off with the conviction that the others would soon join him at the appointed spot. He brought the horse to a standstill near a stream flowing between tall rocks, and leaving it to feed on the tender grass nearby, took the box and forced it open with his rifle. He was shocked. Though it had looked like a strong box, there was nothing in it but cartridges and handcuffs. Usuman flung the box into the river, muttering, "What am I going to do with old iron?" After waiting there for the rest of the night, Usuman decided that harm must have come to his friends, and he went to sleep. The next day, he set out, hungrier than before and even more desperate. There was no knowing when the next transport would come through. He had missed a golden chance. Such information was none too easily come by. For months on end, he roamed wild alone and unsupported with no company save the stolen horse. He was watering his horse one afternoon when, above the lapping of the stream, he thought he heard the noise of grinding wheels. The noise grew louder, and turning around, he saw, rising skywards, a billowing cloud of dust. This was the chance he had been waiting for. Walking cautiously up the bank, he saw a bullock team grinding its way northwards. By his reckoning, about 5 passengers sat inside the coach, and they were traveling with the case and comfort of those who suspect no misfortune. The thick-set driver switched his whip carelessly at the bulls. Mallam Usuman quickly guided his horse up the bank of the stream, and riding slowly along studied the transport for a time. Experience told him that they had been traveling for some time and were therefore very tired. He dug his heels into the flanks of his horse. In a moment, he had drawn up beside them and leveled his gun. "Whoever you are," he sneered, "you can choose." The transport stopped, and the driver turned his sun-scorched face towards him. There was anger in his flaming eyes. "Which do you choose?" Usuman went on. "Your life or your money?" There is no money," stammered the driver. "Don't lie." Usuman, with his quick eye, had already seen the wooden box beneath the driver's seat. But now, as the passengers began to complain and show signs of terror, Usuman noticed that there was a woman in the carriage. She was sitting tightly wedged in between the other gears, calm and cool. She lifted her black veil for a moment, and Usuman's eyes widened at the sight of her face. She was beautiful. The driver must have been watching him, for he said in Hausa, "You like her then?" Unfortunately, She is not for you." "You rat," snapped Usuman. "Throw down the money and drive on." The driver glanced from the bore of the rifle into Usuman's face and decided to obey. He got down, fumbled for a moment, and was bringing out something from under the box when Usuman shot him in the hand and a British revolver dropped to the ground. "Now will you put down the box?" Cursing, the driver pushed down the box with his left hand and climbed back into his seat. "Not yet," said Usuman. He turned and winked at the lady. "Open the carriage and let her step down." The driver's jaw dropped. "Mallam, I swear she is the wife of an Arab prince. I have been commissioned to take her back to her husband." Like something prearranged, all the passengers suddenly let out a howl. "Hey-oh! Why-oh!" The driver leapt back into his seat and waved his arms frantically. From the distance, several horsemen were charging towards them. Usuman saw the danger in which he stood and made up his mind quickly. He leapt down from his horse and struck the driver on the head. With his left hand, he tore open the door of the carriage, brandishing his rifle. In the distance, the guns of his enemy floated in the wind as they galloped towards him, shouting as they came. They were now so near that he might have made out their faces but for the dust. He dealt the beautiful woman a blow with his open fist, and she fell senseless across the door. Then he lifted her body into the saddle. There was no time to pick up the money. When the horsemen came near, he had disappeared. They dispersed in various directions, but no trace of Usuman was to be found. Usuman rode far into the night until he met a nomadic herdsman who sheltered him. The robber had told him that he was from Kano, driven out of his home by the British, that the woman was his wife, and that he was now without any worldly goods. Usuman must have lived with that cattleman for quite a year before I met him. I was going to Sokoto at the time, and my way took me by the cattleman's hut, where I stopped for refreshment. His wife was very kind to me. "We have so little milk these days," she apologized. "The soldier and his wife take everything we have, pay nothing for it, and when we complain, he threatens to shoot us." "You have a soldier staying with you?" "Yes, he is from the Kano Wars." "What is he like?" "Oh, a very big man, and his wife, she closed her eyes very nice." "I am from Kano Wars myself. I want to see this man." At that, the woman grew panicky. "He does not want to see anybody. His temper is very bad." I got down from my horse and went towards the hut. As a man who knew the country at the time, it was natural that I should be cautious. I had my rifle in my hands. My eyes and ears missed nothing that might be dangerous. The door of the hut was open when I came to it. Inside the hut, I saw Usuman and the woman too. She was a beautiful creature, but somehow she did not look Nigerian. Mallam Usuman himself had grown considerably thinner and more unkempt, and his eyes glowered at me from semi-darkness. The very sight of him brought back all the loathing I had for the scoundrel. Controlling my voice, I said, "We've met, Usuman." My hands were trembling. "Come out and let us settle it." From where I stood, I could easily have shot him, but that would have been a cowardly act. It was not like me to take advantage of a weak enemy. I see that he was looking with anxiety at his rifle, which lay just out of his reach behind his wife. He said nothing, and again I invited him. "Did you hear me, Usuman? Come out before I murder you." There was a brief pause. Then Usuman moved suddenly. The door of the hut shut, sending up a cloud of a rifle cracked, and a bullet whistled past my ear. I fired back. A woman screamed. The hut, a mere grass affair, burst open at the back. Mallam Usuman emerged, mounted his horse, and rode off. It had all happened within a moment. I saw the dust raised by his horse as he galloped away. When it cleared, he was out of sight, and all was quiet as death. Just then the silence was broken by the wail of a tiny child. I picked up the child. He was strikingly like Usuman. He had the same piercing eye, the same savage set of lips. It was easy for me to hate this child and to want to destroy it. But after all, I reasoned, why visit the sins of the father on the son? My score would be settled with Mallam Usuman and no other. There now, I said, gathering him up in the cloth in which he lay. Don't cry, come on, let's take you to Kano. There we are sure to find friends to bring you up. Your father is my enemy, but I shall pay for your upbringing. Allah sees. I can assure you I did not enjoy carrying out my decision. The roads were dangerous, and the child was not the ideal traveling companion for a man leading a precarious life. But finally, I settled Usuman's sons among friends at Kano and came away. About 2 years later, something happened in northern Nigeria which disturbed the peace of normal man. It was the year 1906. A man called Satiru had come into prominence and had given out that he was a Mahdiya kind of heaven-sent religious leader. I was staying in Sokoto during the following year. I had already put young Usuman, for whom I felt a responsibility, under a guardian, a Mallam of some repute and standing. When I began to make investigations into the Satiru movement, I found one thing of importance. The Sultan was by no means enthusiastic about it. I also learned that Satiru had joined forces with my old enemy Usuman, and that they were at that moment preparing an army to march against the British. The Sultan sent a messenger to Satiru. "Tell him to come here. In the name of the Prophet, tell him to come. Tell him that I, the spiritual head of all Muslims, want to speak to him." The messenger rode off at dawn. He never returned, and no one knows to this day what actually happened to him. Desperation drove the Sultan to appeal to the British resident. "This is the position," he explained. "Satiru is a mere pretender. He is no religious leader. I have sent a message to him, but he won't come and won't return my messenger." "Well," said the resident, "I want permission to send an army against him." The white man smiled quietly. "My friend," he said, "you have done well, but remember, this is not your war, it is ours." I rejoined the British Army with great hopes of meeting Usuman on the field of battle. We set out for the village of Satiru on a Thursday morning. That day we marched until it was dusk, stopping only at Bodinga, where we slept. Bodinga was a village some few miles from Satiru. The next morning, at about 11:30, we were again on our way. There were about 3 companies of us, some horsemen but mainly infantry. We stopped just outside the village. Those who were not fighting men, people like myself, were sent to collect fodder for the horses. We set off, accompanied by 7 soldiers and 1 sergeant for protection. The rest of the company began to take up positions. Some went off to find tree butts, rocks, and such things that might be used for building a low wall. Our commander immediately sent a messenger on horseback into the village. I was dragged by. We had dug ourselves in, we had eaten a hearty meal, and were waiting for action. All eyes were turned in the direction of the village. Then a horse ran riderless towards us, while behind it, on the wall of the village, a man was waving something black. The messenger's horse. Somebody gasped. But where is the messenger himself? The white men who had been looking through their glasses answered the question. They told us that the man who was standing on the wall of the village was waving nothing but a human head. He was a big man with a wild beard and a cut on his cheek. My blood boiled when I heard that. "That is Usuman," I shouted. "Who is Usuman?" "A wild creature, a man who claims to be son of the emir." "We don't know him. The emir has no such son." Our officers warned us that they could see Satiru making preparations for action. Then guns, hatchets, and clubs were being distributed, and the inhabitants were rushing hither and thither in an excited state. At the command, those who had already formed a square began to move forward. Just then, when our troops were still maneuvering to get into position, Satiru came down upon us, yelling and shouting. 3 Englishmen were killed, and our troops had to retreat in considerable distress. Satiru had defeated us in that first encounter. After we had retired, he had captured one of the Englishmen and had tried to get information out of him about how to work the field guns. Threats, torture, and bullying were alike to no avail. Somewhat out of temper, Satiru shot him. Our broken troops got back to Sokoto, disgraced by an untrained fanatic. We had no courage to go back just then against such numbers as the Mahdi had, and so we appealed to Zungeru for help. That was 700 miles away. There were no roads as we know them today, no telegraph lines, and robbers roamed wild. It took the best part of 2 months before our messengers got there and came back with the cheerful news that help was forthcoming soon. Meantime, there was every possibility that Satiru would swoop down upon us and exterminate us before that happy event took place. But the help did come, and during our interval of anxiety, Satiru did nothing about his own position. That Saturday morning, when we left Sokoto for the second encounter, he was probably no more aware of his own danger than of the fact that heaven had not sent him to lead his people. This time, we knew what we were up against. The moment we came within sight of the village, we opened fire. Satiru, surprised out of his spiritual meditations, had scarcely time to get ready. Within a few moments of our arrival, the place was a success of flames and smokes. Goats and sheep ran here and there, panic-stricken. The people themselves poured out of their houses, yelling and trying to save their property. Satiru was captured and made prisoner. He was a much younger man than I had expected. His long, lean face belied that fire which burned in his heart and drew followers to him by the thousand. I was making a final tour of the village of Satiru, my eyes wide open, my ears tuned to hear the least suspicious noise. I knew what I was looking for. It was evening then, and the sun had gone down. I remember that day well. Not very warm, and there was dust and smoke about. Suddenly came upon a very conspicuous building. It had a flag on top, a sign that it was a drinking house. The roof had fallen in, but the middle of the main room was occupied by a table which suggested quite recent use. I looked around. There was no one in sight. I had concluded that the room was empty and had turned my back when from nowhere came a heavy blow on the back of my head. My left arm felt suddenly numb and went limp. Voices came to me as in a dream. "Wait," said a woman. "You've killed him." "Yes," said a man. "Let's go." It was Usman's voice.